Gift is a developer advocate at Cloudflare, and she has worked in the web development industry for over 5 years, building tools that help businesses scale. Today, Gift will be showing her talk about going beyond passwords, and with that, I'll pass over to Gift. Please give her a warm welcome.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm excited to be here, and yeah, I'm going to be sharing today going beyond password, the future of authentication. Essentially, this talk is around, we've been using passwords for like the longest time. What is the next phase like after that? And is passwords even safe anymore? I am Gift. I work as a developer advocate at Cloudflare. I'm also an Auth0 ambassador, so a portion of this talk will touch on Auth0. And also, I am CTGS Lagos organizer. All right, if you'd like to follow through, you can scan the QR code to get access to the slides, but let's move forward. Like I said, for the longest time, we've been using passwords as the default way to authenticate people on the web. Most websites that you go to today, they ask you for an email or a username and a password. Even though this is the default, with the rise of cybercrime, data breaches, and bad actors, we're finding that passwords are actually not the best. They've become actually a liability rather than the best way to secure people on the internet. Let's do a quick survey. I know we have a few people in the room, so I'll please ask everybody to participate in this. I would ask you a few questions, and based on the questions on the screen, just raise your hand if you relate to it. So the first one is, have you ever stored your password in a notepad? Whether you've done that before or you still do that, hands. Okay, a few people. Have you used the same password for same account, different account rather? Okay, a few people, me included. And finally, have you used your name or date of birth as your password? At some point. Okay. Now, a few people here raised their hands for some of this, meaning that it's pretty common that people do these things, even till today. But from everything that I've listed, of course, the big thing here is these are not secure ways to, store your password. So last year, I was reading this article from Tom's Guide where they review the worst passwords of the year every year. And this is last year, and you see people still use password as the actual password. People use QWERTY because it's easy to type, right? And these are very insecure passwords because, of course, it's very easy to hack into these people's accounts and easy for them to be breached as well. So why is this the case? A lot of people find that when you have a form asking you to put your password, you want to enter a password that you can easily remember. The very recent data breach report published in 2021 shows that over 84% of the data breach that happened that year was due to either weak passwords or stolen passwords. Of course, there are guidelines to creating passwords, but are people familiar with it? Not exactly, and the reason behind this is a lot of sign-up forms don't have validations to allow for these cases. So first, if you're creating a password, what guidelines should you follow? You should make sure that they use a combination of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. The password that I showed you before, those platforms probably did not check for that to allow them just enter password because that's a weak password, of course. Another guideline to always follow is to avoid using guessable information like your name, your address, or your date of birth. And also try to use different passwords across your different accounts. And finally, make sure that the password that you're entering is at least 12 characters long. So these are standard guidelines to creating strong passwords. But fortunately, it's still not the default way that people would use to create their passwords, right? There is a website called HaveIbmporn.com if you visit this website, you can actually check if you have a password that you've reused multiple times. You can see if it's been pawned, like if it's been in any data breach over the years. I was testing one of the passwords that I used to use from way back, and I see that it's been pawned in like 3 different data breaches. And this is essentially because first is a weak password, of course, and I reused it in different platforms. So one way to solve for this is by using password managers. You can start using password managers to create and store your passwords. Of course, they suggest more stronger passwords by default. You don't need to remember them because it's stored in your vault. Some examples of password managers that we use today include LastPass, Bitwarden, 1Password, and Keeper. These are great, but is this the solution to creating more secure passwords on the internet? Not really, because even with this, even with using a password manager, there are still password breaches. And the most recent one that I found was from LastPass. Sometime in December or late last year, they had like a big security breach, and a lot of people's passwords was breached, and people had to like start moving away from the platform. So one way to avoid this is by using two-factor authentication alongside your password manager, so that way your vault is more secured. But of course, most people still don't utilize any of these different solutions that I've preferred today. Thinking about passwords, what about passphrases? Is that like the next best thing? Honestly, I feel like it's great because with password, you have to generate first a unique string that has numbers, characters. If you're not using a password manager, I think that's very difficult to guess every single time. But with passphrases, there are things you can easily remember. It could be like the one in the gift there, correct horse battery staple. You can remember that, right? But imagine having different passphrases for different accounts. Now, that's now hard to remember. So I don't think this is the right replacement for password. I also saw this tweet from Angie recently where she was trying to create an account on a platform, and they would generate you a key and ask you to save it. But then when you lose that key, that's the end, right? You cannot get access to your account anymore. I also don't think this is a good replacement for passwords. I even had this happen to me. So I was using an app called Trust Wallet, and I lost my passphrase. And up till now, I still have $200 that's gone because I can't actually get my account back. I can't get that back. But so with everything that I've shared, passwords, the other options that are available, I don't think that those are good replacements for authentication. And we know that authentication plays a key role in our digital, experience. Whatever you want to do online, you're asked to create an account, you're asked to authenticate. So what then is the best approach for authentication on the web? I'm going to be sharing 3 different modern authentication strategies that you can start utilizing as developers if you're building your applications, or as developers if you're building your application. The first one is passwordless authentication, multi-factor authentication, and finally single sign-on authentication. So I'll show you examples of how these are being implemented and what the benefits are essentially. So we'll start with the first one, passwordless authentication. Essentially what this means is it enables you to log into an application without necessarily using a password. They are pretty secure because you need to have access to something that you own. This could either be your phone or a device, for example. There are different types of ways to implement passwordless authentication. You have magic links, one-time passwords, and SMS notifications. Right now, if you also pay attention to the way you are being authenticated to new platforms that you sign into, you find that most platforms these days are no longer asking you for a username or a password. Rather, they just ask for your email, and they use one of these three methods. So it's either you get a link when you sign in, and then you are authenticated through the link, or you're sent an OTP, or you get an SMS notification. So I want to show you quickly how this is implemented in real time using Auth0. So first, Auth0 is a platform that allows you to do user authentication using one of their SDKs or API. Here, I'm using the Next.js library, the Next.js Auth0 library, to implement authentication in this Next app. So first, I want to show you a basic authentication route, how it works with Auth0. So essentially, how to add username and password to your Next.js app. So the first thing here that I did is, of course, install the Next.js Auth0 library, and then I'm using this I'm also adding the handle alt method, and then I'm using the use user to get the person's email and their first name and last name that they used to sign in, so that I can show that in my application. On the left-hand side, you see the example of the app where I'm trying to sign in using my email and my password, and then when I'm authenticated, I also can see my email, just my email actually, and then Auth0 gives you the functions for login, logout, and also social authentication. Like you see, you have sign in with Google and GitHub. This is the typical route that we see every time. But how do you then do passwordless with this? With Auth0, you have something called Passwordless Connections, where you can, on top of what you currently have with the universal login, you can add passwordless authentication using SMS or email. All you need to do is turn on either of these buttons. So for this specific demo, I will be using the email passwordless connection. So what I essentially need to do to set it up is, after selecting email, you can add a custom message. So the message the person gets when they try to sign in, you can add that using HTML, and then on the left, again, you select the specific application. So in Auth0, when you create a new application, it means the application is, with that application, you create an API token and API key that you can then use in your application. So my app is called the giftcode.dev. And once I turn that on, the last thing I need to do is also select customized login page. The difference between the previous login page and this is this one removes the password field that you currently saw in the previous demo. And then with that, I go back to my app. You see it's a little bit different form than before. This form has just your email field. And then once I enter my email, I get a code. Of course, I'm not showing my email here, but I copy the code, and then I put that code into this box, and I'm authenticated, right? So you see the difference between the username and password, so the universal login and the passwordless login. The same applies if you're doing SMS. So if I was using SMS, the code generated will be sent to my phone number, and then I can log in. So this is great. I honestly feel like it's a more seamless and secure way to authenticate your users as developers. But what other methods are available? There's also multi-factor authentication. Essentially, with multi-factor authentication, you need three things. You need to have something that you know. It could either be a password, passphrase, or a PIN. You need to have something that you have. It could be a soft or hard token. And then finally, something that you are, so your thumbprint or any other form of biometrics, your face, so when you try to log in using Face ID. So there are different ways to implement this as well. You can either use SMS notification, voice notification, OTP, and WebAuthent with FIDO security keys. So Auth0 gives you different multi-factor authentication that you can use. So on top of your application, so after building your when you're building your application and you want to add multi-factor authentication with Auth0, all you need to do is also in the dashboard, you can select enable any of these methods here. So the first one is WebAuthent. Of course, I have everything disabled now, but I'll show you how that would work if we are using it. On the left-hand side, you see if you have either the Auth0 Guardian one turned on, how it will look in the login form. The Google Authenticator SMS and security key factors are also listed in that login form. So this is a sample authentication flow if you're using SMS or voice. So the first thing that happens is, I hope this is visible. So the first thing that happens is in the login form, you're asked to either receive a SMS or a voice call. And whether you choose to receive either, you get a code. And with that code, you can then log into your application, right? So this is on top of your username and password or passwordless, because multi-factor adds multi-factor authentication requires you to add authentication on top of what you already have. And this one is the OTP flow, where you have an authenticator app, in this case Google Authenticator, and then you try to log in. You, of course, have to connect or scan a QR code to get the actual 6-digit code from your authenticator, in this case, Google Authenticator, and then after that, you can impute the 6-digit code to log into your application. And then the last one is a more recent API called the Web Authentication API, which security keys like Ubico are currently using.
Here's some information.
Oh my God. Security keys like Ubico currently use. So how this works is if you try to log into a platform, you're asked to authenticate using your key. So all you need to do is just tap your key and then you get authenticated. And I've seen a lot of companies utilize this, specifically where I work, Cloudflare. We are using the FIDO2 implementation with YubiKey, and Netlify also does the same. And the good thing here is with this, I think this is the most secure way to authenticate people on the web. But of course, the benefit is also it can help stop phishing attacks, right? The WebAuthent API is currently supported by most browsers, all except Firefox at the moment. But Auth0 allows you to add it to your app directly by just turning on a button. But of course, if you like to implement it on your own, there are actual JavaScript, TypeScript libraries for you to implement this directly into your app as well. The last authentication strategy is single sign-on. And essentially what this is an authentication method that allows a user to sign into multiple accounts, but using one credential. We can see that example today with Google. So when you sign into your Google account, you see that you have access to Gmail, you have access to Google Docs, you have access to YouTube, but you just used one credential to log in. So that's single sign-on in action. But why is this useful? This is mostly useful for organizations that I've seen where you have different softwares that you use, but instead of creating a new username and password for all these different softwares, you just have one username. Maybe it could be your actual company email and password, and then once you sign into a platform, maybe in this case Okta, you have access to a host of other applications. What are the benefits of using single sign-on? I think the first one is the experience of the user in itself, because of course they don't have to remember so many different passwords that they have. They can just have one credential and they are able to access the different platforms that they are using. It also improves productivity by eliminating the need for you to remember any password. it helps organizations to maintain control over user access and permissions because they can control who has access to what software and whatnot. And finally, it helps reduce the risk of unauthorized access to sensitive information. There are two main single sign-on auth protocols. So if you're trying to implement this in your application, you find that there are two. So which one do you actually go for? Depending on your use case, there is the OpenID Connect protocol and the SAML protocol. The OpenID Connect protocol is similar to how you'd use Google as your identity provider for signing into different applications. So this OpenID identity layer sits on top of the OAuth 2 protocol, and it allows easy verification of users' identity. SAML, on the other hand, is another open standard format that allows businesses or organizations to authenticate.
Here's what I found.
My series on a roll today. So I'll take that again. SAML protocol, on the other hand, is an open standard that allows organizations to communicate user authentication and authorization information. So a typical example is anyone familiar with Okta? Yeah, okay. So if you have an Okta dashboard, you sign into your Okta, you find that you have different softwares or platform that you can log into. You see that you didn't actually create a new password. You didn't actually create a new password to access them. You just need one. So that's essentially how single sign-on works using the SAML protocol. So I'm going to try to illustrate to you how Auth0 works or how Auth0 implements this in their platform. So this is a typical non-single sign-on scenario where, remember, for single sign-on to work, you need one credential to access multiple applications. So here I'm trying to say I have two domains, domain 1 and domain 2, and I want, when I sign into the first domain, I don't need to log into the next one. I can just access it. But that's not actually how the web works. You cannot essentially share session or cookies between one domain and another because of something called same origin policy. It's not allowed. As long as they are different domains, you cannot do that. So how does Auth0 actually handle single sign-on? So Auth0 comes in as an auth server or identity protocol on top of this layer. So what they do is when you try to sign in to domain 1, this is a screen that then pops up. So Auth0 is the one handling the session storage, and then they store the session storage as something called SSO cookie. And then when you try to log into another domain, Auth0 will check if you've logged into a previous one and if there is a cookie that already exists, and then they just give you access to the second domain you're trying to log into. The same happens if we have like a domain 3 or a domain 4, right? So Auth0 here is the identity provider, in this case allowing the applications or the software that you're trying to access to be authenticated, because of course they've already stored a cookie. That makes sense. All right. I've shared today with you 3 different ways for you to do authentication that does not include storing passwords. But of course, if you work in a company where that's the default thing you currently do, how do you tell them, how do you adopt modern user authentication solutions? So the first thing, of course, that I would prefer for you to do is conduct a security assessment, see if the current implementation that you have in your system or in your team is the most secure. Now a lot of people are optimizing or migrating from using passwords to using either passwordless or single sign-on. So make sure that you know the reason why you want to do it, and of course the next step would be to choose the right authentication method. So there are these 3 different ways that you could do authentication that would also improve the lives of our users because they don't have to store passwords anymore. Which one do we actually want to implement? And also make sure that you have strong password policies in your team or platform that you're implementing, educating your users is also very important, because I find that even if you do all of this on top of putting like username and password, and you still don't have, for example, validations, people will still type password as their password, right? So it's not like, if they don't know, if the end users don't know what the risk of storing weak passwords is, at the end of the day, all of this is, I think it's best to educate people, honestly, so yeah. Finally, regularly monitor and update security measures in your team or, yeah, on the platform that you're building. So with that, I would ask this final question. I'm not expecting a response, but are passwords going away completely? Honestly, I find that maybe in a few years, we'll probably not have anybody asking for passwords again, because of all the new ways that are available to allow you to, authenticate without passwords. So thank you so much. I hope you learned something from this talk.
Thank you very much, Gift, for your talk. I really like the way you describe multi-factor as something you know, something you have, and something you are.
Thank you.
So also agree on the educating users about risk, because if people don't know why they have to type 20-character long plus passwords, then they're just going to copy and paste the same ones and not do it. So wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Thank you
and
very
thank you,
much.
everyone.
Yeah. And so thank you.